Welcome to One Control Report Podcast, episode 368. My name is Benjamin Yoder, here today to talk to you about video games. It's been a little bit. If you don't remember last time, I was coming back into town after being out of town on the Monday that the podcast would go up, and this might be the first episode we've missed. I'm not actually sure, but reality is that honestly, look, this is a little show for you and me. It's not a big deal. I need to not stress about it so much. So this was me being like, it's okay. If we're in a situation where recording a podcast episode doesn't make a lot of sense, it's okay. If I did not do the FF11 podcast, I probably would have filled it in there, but I had already done that fairly recently. So anyways, so we're going to do a little bit of catch up this week. We're going to be talking about some new localizations for some Switch games. Level 5 had an event. We're not going to go too deep into that because it is fairly old. I'm guessing most of you have seen that stuff. Just some like top level thoughts and some stuff there. I recently added a couple games to my Steam wish list. So I talk a little bit about those games and if I'll ever play them. There's a new Venus Vacation game, interestingly enough. And then finally, we'll wrap up the show news story-wise with a topic around a adult game developer. If you remember years ago, I don't know how long ago it was. There was a adult game developer that was called Illusion. And recently, there's been some new updates to the really weird story of what happened to them. I don't know if it's really weird, but there's a lot of missing information, I should say. There's a lot of things that I think we just don't know about, or at least I don't know about. Maybe put it that way, because I have not been doing investigative research on this. So maybe somebody out there has already put the pieces together, but whatever. But I'll save that for the end, so you can tune out if you don't want to hear about adult game developer. At the same time, I doubt we'll talk about anything scandalous, is that the word? I don't know. Anyways, but yeah, so just to kind of catch up, I was out of town for Portland Retro Game Expo. I had a booth there for the PCFX fan club. I'm not going to talk about it a lot here because I did a whole PCFX fan club podcast about the booth at PRGE. So there is not a lot of reason for me to kind of reiterate a lot of that stuff. I might touch on some stuff in the future about it, but I don't think it's important enough to kind of hit within the context of this. So go check that episode out if you're curious about what PRGE looked like for me. It was the first time I ever hosted a booth at a convention. So, it was a new experience. And so that's why I'm kind of there's maybe some discussion to be had about that in a more personal sense versus a PCFX fan club sense. Because there were a couple questions kind of from people about A, why do you do it? B, what do you do after this? C, what was your intention? What did you get out of it? And then also D, why did you talk to the people you talked to? And I think it is interesting, those questions, but I don't think I have not figured those out in my brain yet. I gotta mull on that more. I did kind of give some responses on the PCFX fan club, but it's one of those things where I gave a response because Matt was asking me about it, not necessarily because I felt comfortable saying oh, this is why I reached out to these specific people, because I really focus it on the point of the narrative of that booth. So anyways, go check that out. I'm not gonna talk about it anymore. What I want to talk about though, the part of PRGE that I could not show on the PCFX fan club because it was too outlandish, not too outlandish. The PCFX fan club does not care about the hit Final Fantasy VII video game character Reeve, but the people behind me at my booth had a book called Reeve Nation. Now, it's been a while since we talked about Final Fantasy VII. If you know me, my two favorite Final Fantasy VII games are Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier and Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus. That is over the original Final Fantasy VII, so I'm in a little bit of a weird situation there. However, Reeve from Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus, who is in Final Fantasy VII, he's the character Katshi or Kate Sith, or I don't know how they pronounce it. He is one of my favorite characters, but mostly based off his Dirge of Cerberus appearance, which is the PS2 shooter featuring Vincent Valentine. But the artist behind me has a book called Reeve Nation. So this is Artist Black. And Artist Black created an entire book about Reeve. And it's very cute. I will say, fairly sexy. So if you are not into sexy time books, and it's nothing like 18 plus, but the cover of this book is Reeve with his like shirt busted open, holding a gun, and then Rufus from Shinra like grabbing onto his leg with his like shirt falling off and stuff. So it has some of those tones and things like that. But what I really like about these kind of books is, especially being in English, it makes it a lot easier to understand, is you get kind of a little bit of a peek into like somebody's like, I don't know how to put it, fascination with the character in some way. So previously we talked about the Freedom Wars book, what was it called? Why Do We Know Kywolf Silva, which got an English translation. And then I believe we also talked about the Papa Neer book, right? And so you get kind of a feel for like each of these fan bases and how they feel about a character. And I think more importantly than most of that stuff is like where do they fill in the gaps with these characters? Because characters like Reeve, I mean, I have not played the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I don't know what Reeve's deal is there. But, there's a lot of like gaps in like what kind of character he is. And so it creates a really like interesting environment where you can like take these kind of like character traits from a character and really like expound upon them. And it becomes almost like, it almost feels like joke writing at times. So I had a friend who was like really into Gunvolt and like pairing Gunvolt characters and things like that. And if you ever played the original Gunvolt, especially the American release of the original game, there is very little character story there. They did do drama CDs and stuff later, but it's like these very like small little bits of like lore details they fill in with each character. So what happens is you get like almost like, I would say almost joke writing kind of nature where they will basically like attach on to like certain character traits or certain like connections they have with other characters, or sometimes like specific events that happen. And sometimes it might be like not really important events to a game, and just kind of like expand it out a little bit and kind of like fantasize a little bit about like where it could go. Like here's a page in here that is like him or Cloud dating Kate Sith in like his puppet form, which is again Reeve. And then also there's like some stuff in here about like Reeve and Vincent like making out, and the idea of like what does his puppets on the side mean? I think there's like a comment somewhere in this book about like, I don't understand how Reeve's puppets work, because like they can be like both controlled at once. Reeve also has a puppet of himself in Dirge of Cerberus, if you haven't seen. So like, I don't think they've really explored in the official lore like how Reeve controls all this stuff and stuff like that. So it's really, really fun and really cute. And one of the things that they also have in here is a listing for ReeveCon, which apparently is a fake Reeve convention from when the artist went to a Final Fantasy VII concert, I believe, and then just like printed her own ReeveCon badges and stuff like that. So anyways, it's really cute. It's really fun. I recommend checking it out if you're into this kind of stuff. I know for my audience, they may not necessarily get into it as much, but like when you think of games, like it's one of the challenging things when talking about like a game like Buddy Mission Bond, right? When I talk about Buddy Mission Bond to people who are probably more like standard Nintendo fans and things like that, I sometimes wonder if this kind of aspect of like character, I don't know, fantasization or something like that, I don't really know, like these kind of like, character mini fan fictions and stuff, like if that aspect of Buddy Mission Bond really gets to them. And like, I don't really know if I really talked about it that much in the video either. So I don't think I did a good job, because I think I mentioned just like, I think I just mentioned that like characters are going to be shipped and stuff like that. I think there's probably a good discussion to be had there about like, hey, like what kind of characters kind of encourage this environment where fans can sit there and like kind of collaborate and talk about these kind of things. Now, Reeve, not exactly, the most popular Final Fantasy VII character, so I think a fairly limited audience for that. But in some ways, it is a really nice way to like share a lot of this stuff with like people like me who are like, I love Reeve and I want to see all that you have written about Reeve. So, anyways, Reeve Nation, Artist Black, check it out. I doubt anyone in here will want to buy it, but I hope if you are interested. It is a whole book of this stuff. And I think that's very cool. And I think it's definitely worth supporting that kind of stuff. So I actually don't know. So I talked a little bit to, they had another person at their booth that talked to me a little bit about like kind of the doujin scene in Japan and how they were kind of inspired to make books based off that instead of like focusing more on like prints and things like that with artist alleys. Typically at artist alleys, I feel like it's mostly print focused. And I believe, I'm trying to remember, it is getting to the point where it's like been almost a month since I was there. But I'm trying to remember, I think they had mostly like books and things like that, but I could be misremembering. But I do believe I've heard in the past that like printing can be challenging in the US because it's a lot more expensive versus in Japan. I will say this book is much thicker and like probably a higher quality than most doujin books I have purchased. Most doujin books are fairly flimsy with like really light paper. And in some ways it's charming in its own fashion. But like Reeve Nation, I could put on a shelf and feel pretty good about it. A lot of doujin books, if I put it on a shelf, I do not have the expectation that it would bear the elements in the long term kind of thing. So anyways, that was ReeveCon, my secret ReeveCon. It was just me. I kind of felt bad because like I was really excited for it, but I had a booth to take care of, so I couldn't like really engage that much in what was going on with the Reeve Land behind me. If only I could have gone to Reeve Land myself, but no, I took the PCFX job. So anyways, but yeah. Just a couple of game update stuff. I haven't really beaten anything recently, so I don't really have anything to talk about in depth. I have been playing a little bit of Polarium. So that's the DS like kind of puzzle game kind of thing where you like drag the cursor around and flip the tiles to different colors. I have not been very good about playing that in the way that I played other puzzle games. When I was playing like Game Boy Tetris and stuff like right before bed and like when I was waking up in the morning and stuff like that. I need to kind of get Polarium in that environment for me, so I haven't really been doing that. So I plan to kind of try to do that, but I don't really have any thoughts on that right now that I want to share at the moment. And then also, God, Final Fantasy XI is one of those things where it is always just really tempting to just spend a lot of time in Final Fantasy XI. I probably spent too much time in Final Fantasy XI this weekend, and then when you get progress in Final Fantasy XI, it does feel good. It is very consistent and easy progress to make. It's one of those things, I think I talked about it before, with like, hey, if I want to get something done in Final Fantasy XI, I know I can get it done within, a couple of hours or whatever it is, which is a long time, versus like, when you work on other things in life. Like, you may work on something for a long time and not get what you want, or maybe be disappointed with the results. So I think there's always that temptation of playing Final Fantasy XI over actually doing other things. Admittedly, I think I kind of played Final Fantasy XI myself on Friday, and then Saturday I had more like social Final Fantasy XI time kind of thing. So a little too much. Gonna try not to play too much this week. I am back in kind of crafting mode where I am just like making and selling stuff because I do kind of need a good chunk of money as I'm getting closer and closer to the end game. There's really not a lot to say about like the gameplay of Final Fantasy XI that has changed that much. I feel like level 50 and beyond is really where Final Fantasy XI starts to become a bit more standardized in how it plays, what your job does, and things like that. So there's not a lot to say there, but I do want to talk a little bit about the Final Fantasy XI crafting guild experience a little bit, because maybe if you don't know Final Fantasy XI, this might be interesting. I don't know for sure. I don't know if I've talked about this that much, but Final Fantasy XI, you have the ability to do crafts. There's like 6 different crafts, like woodworking, alchemy, goldsmithing, things like that. There's a bunch of different things, and you can level it up, you can skill up, and then you can get up to level 60 craft, and then you can also get to level 100, but only in one craft you can get to level 100. So it's you basically at some point have to specialize kind of thing. But right now I'm just getting every craft to 60 because I am a masochist and I am like almost a year into this crafting journey, and I'm getting there, but not quite there yet. But one of the things that is kind of interesting about it is when you are doing woodworking, things like that, there are some things that kind of bring you together with other people in certain situations. And what I mean by that is, when you are crafting, there are kind of 2 things to keep in mind. Well, really more than anything, there's a guild. The crafting guild is something in the game that you need to go to for kind of 3 different reasons. One is to upgrade your craft skills. So if you hit a certain cap, you need to go talk to essentially your mentor, and he'll basically give you a lesson. In this case, it's basically just, or in most cases, it's basically just, or in all cases, it's basically just, hey, looks like you're ready to get a higher level skill. Make me this sword, and then turn it into me when you're good. And if you are lazy enough, you can just go buy a sword off the auction house and turn it in, and be like, yeah, I made this. So I think a lot of people do that, but. Anyways, so you can do that. But then the probably more primary things you do there is, one is get synthesis support. So if you go and find, kind of two different types of mentors there. One is a more like, I guess like another student, you can think of it kind of thing. Or maybe just like a newer person there, and they give you like a slight boost to your support. And then you have the, advanced support, which comes from like the guilds like veteran crafter, and that veteran support does cost some money, not a ton, but some money, and it gives you a little bit more extra support for crafting. So it just means what that means is it's just more likely that when you're working on something, it's less likely to fail. I don't know. You can also like get high quality versions of crafts, and so you can get like a sword +1 and it does more damage, right? I don't know if the mentor status, like, or the synthesis support from the mentors, really impact that. So there's that. And so you kind of if you want to do some crafting and you want to make sure that you are more successful with your craft, that is something. So you often see people around, specifically the more advanced mentor, and them just crafting things like that. So you can kind of like gather together that way. And then lastly, there's also the guild shop. Now, so from my understanding, this might not be true on Modern Final Fantasy XI. Again, I'm playing on the Horizon 11 server, which is basically running in I would describe it as a like 2005 to 2000 like 8-ish style Final Fantasy XI, even though the content's from like early 2000 right now. But I believe on the retail servers, this whole mechanic doesn't work or doesn't happen anymore. But there's hours to the guild. So when you go to buy stuff from the guild, there are work hours, so each guild has an opening time, each guild has a close time. Every week there's a holiday for the guild, so if you're at the woodworking guild, then Fire's Day is the holiday, I assume because fire and wood do not probably go well together. So that's their holiday. And then also, there are, in the guild shop, they sell things, but there's a set number of inventory in there. So the pricing of that inventory and the number of items you can buy varies depending on who's buying and who's selling, basically. And this is all my understanding, I would say. I like Final Fantasy XI MMO is a game that people have data mined to death, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's a whole post explaining how this works, and maybe I get something wrong here, but this is my impression as a casual player kind of nosing into it. But what that means is that right before hours open, if you want to get stuff at the cheapest cost, or make sure you can buy something from the guild, you need to be there first thing in the morning, depending on how much demand it is. So what happens is a bunch of people like kind of gather together and they sit at this this countertop and wait for the store to open, essentially. And then sometimes you get some people kind of talking back and forth. Like, there's one guy on the server that I'm playing that every time the store opens, he just says praise log. Because I'm doing woodworking right now. I'm trying to kind of liquidate a lot of like arrow wood material that I have, or arrow material that needs wood to be made. So I've been spending a lot of time at that guild. But yeah, and so you all kind of gather together, buy your stuff, and everybody either logs out and comes back later, or leaves and do something else. So, but it's interesting because the stock doesn't replenish the same every day, or rather it replenishes the same, but not like fully every day. So what happens is you have items and things that will take like 3 days to be fully replenished, and then also be in a position where it's cheap enough that it's worth buying from the guild versus like, buying it off the player run auction house and things like that. And so I'd be curious if there's any different like culture aspects between like Japanese players and American players with this kind of thing. But with, at least on a server like Horizon 11, it is pretty much everybody just kind of like rushes the counter and tries to buy stuff as fast as possible to try to get the items they want, because if they sell out, and they're gone. So But there's a lot of things in Final Fantasy XI where there'd be player-made lines that was typically, I believe, kind of initiated on the Japanese player-based side, where people would create lines to do content. So you have just there's like a bunch of pictures. It's one of the things that Final Fantasy XI is probably fairly known about, is that there's pictures out there about like players forming up lines and things like that. I will say that is like the common myth of like how this stuff formed, that the Japanese player base did this. Japan is kind of known for waiting in line, people in Japan. So you could technically cut in line, but obviously you are causing everybody else grief and all that kind of stuff. There could also be that the GMs, like the people who are actually running the server, kind of like set it up that way. And so everybody kind of started doing that. But I'm sure there's somebody at some point who would cut line and do that. So I'm curious if that kind of culture was ever around the guilds in Final Fantasy XI, but I feel like it is just such an everyday thing. And it's also something that there is not a lot to stop anyone from just like going and buying, where like with certain content in the game, the reason why lines would form is because only one person could do it at a time. Or if you're buying from the shelf, you can buy and anyone can buy. So I think it is just like a mad dash to buy stuff and things like that. So yeah, but that is, I will say, I feel like this is most useful at the woodworking guild. I feel like just wood in Final Fantasy XI at the guild is just super cheap compared to everywhere else. And I could be wrong, but I feel like most other guilds in Final Fantasy XI don't offer things as cheap as the woodworking guild does. So I have amassed, it's an issue because I have amassed a large amount of wood because it was cheap and affordable, not so much because I have like the ability to sell it right now. So I have like stacks and stacks of just wood in my inventory right now. So I'm like, what do I do with all this? And I'm debating just selling it all. So anyways, there's a little bit of Final Fantasy XI crafting guild experience. I will say the general sentiment on this server, Horizon 11, is that crafting isn't really worth doing from like a money perspective. I think the problem is that it's really, I've talked about this before on the Final Fantasy XI podcast, where I talked about my year of Final Fantasy XI with Horizon 11. And I think the player base, the expectations, understanding, or maybe expectations, knowledge, and the like type of player invested in Horizon 11 specifically is very different than a retail server. I feel like the retail server had a lot more people who didn't know what they were doing, just checking it out because either they liked online games or because they like Final Fantasy and wanted to check out what an online Final Fantasy would look like, right? And so I think there is a lot less of kind of the idea of having the meta for everything down. And so I think with crafting and things like that, people know how to level up crafts probably very efficiently nowadays, where I think probably back in the day it was a lot harder. There's a lot of things about Final Fantasy XI that just were not very clear back in the day, due to either lack of knowledge or that people weren't trained to go look for this knowledge typically. You can go find old posts on the internet about people on forums like asking how to make different things and things like that. It's, I think, a little bit more communication that was happening around this kind of stuff, versus just, going and pulling up the ultimate woodworking guide wiki or something like that, right? So anyways, I am on track to hit my Final Fantasy XI goals for this year, I will say. I am level 69 out of 75, and I am, as of last night, about halfway through the story content that I was trying to do. Not the whole game, but for this particular branch of story content I was trying to do, about halfway through. Yeah, but that story content and hitting 75 is kind of like my two main goals. That doesn't mean I won't play any more Final Fantasy XI after that. But I think that will probably be when I will start saying, like, okay, let me go do other things. Final Fantasy XI, I think, in some ways has definitely disrupted my personal gaming life a lot. But at the same time, I don't necessarily regret it. I think I've learned a lot from playing Final Fantasy XI over all this time. I feel like past level like 50 or 60, things have very much started to slow down in terms of what I'm learning. But, once I hit 75, there will be access to more content and things like that I can do. So we'll see. I am undecided on how I want to engage with that, when I want to engage with that, and how often I want to engage with that. But it sounds like this server has a lot of I feel like the server has a lot more casual opportunities for top level content because in some ways the meta, I think, makes people more reliable and be able to clear content. So there's a lot less trial and error that has to happen through like weekly runs and things like that. So anyways, thank you so much for listening to me. Ko-fi time. Are you listening to me right now? Well, you could also be giving me your money. We actually got Demodori. Demodori donated per usual, so we have our September donation from Demodori. Thank you, Demodori. But we actually did get a new donation from, let me see how do I pronounce this? Conspicuous Snoop, who donated a fairly large chunk of money. So thank you, Conspicuous Snoop. Yeah, there we go. I got it. And you know, we already were pretty close to maximizing our making our goal. So I could basically take a work day off my regular job and work on a OCP video with Conspicuous Snoop's donation. We are almost at 2 days of me doing that. So I will try to use that first day as soon as I can. A big part of the problem of me coming back was I had to catch up on work as well, so I couldn't really take a day off. And there's a couple of obligations at work that I have, but if I can in the next couple weeks, I will try to select a day and then sit down and really hunker down on working on the Nintendo video and trying to get that as far as long as I can. So I will do that as soon as I can. But thank you again for everybody for donating. If you do donate, you do get access to that video that I'll be working on, the audio version of it, because I went ahead and recorded a initial draft of it on the audio side. It's a video about kind of my relationship with Nintendo over the years and how I think that has informed my gaming experiences going forward. It is a bit of a personal video. Sometimes I'm a little iffy on how much I like doing those. I think sometimes I'm kind of like, who cares? But I also think that when I look at the content people seem to enjoy online, that seems to be it. And that's not to say that I'm doing this because of that, but I think in terms of like, you know, being okay in my head about doing a video like this and being like, what value does this really add? Like, is somebody really gaining any knowledge from this video? I don't know. But I hopefully would think that it helps them understand themselves a little bit better through me understanding myself. Does that make sense? Like, let me put myself on presentation here of what I think is how I developed my relationship with games, and maybe that can help you understand how you developed your relationship with games. Does that make sense? Hopefully. That audio draft is available for you to listen if you would like to. But until then, you can wait and I'll try to get the video done as soon as possible. So I did have a video launch though. The video that took a while to come out, the Phantasy Star Online video that I did for warm up earlier this year. I'm kind of curious, when did I post the audio draft for that? May 22nd. That's my birthday. I went ahead and put that out. So, well, that was the audio draft, was May 22nd. The final video is finally out now. It came out while I was out of town. It was maybe bad timing for me to set it up. It's a video about the Phantasy Star Online little, what's it called? What's it called? My brain is starting to lock up right now. Sorry. About the tiny menu in Final Fantasy or in Phantasy Star Online, the shortcut window. There we go. That's the name of it. And it just talks about, I mean, really it is a video about the mechanics of Phantasy Star Online and then how the shortcut window accentuates it. So if you want to check that out, you can do that. Also, I did a post-mortem on Ko-fi that is freely available to everybody. So if you want to see kind of what I think went right and what went wrong with those videos, or with that video, I went ahead and put that out as well if you want to read that. So check that out. And then finally, also, I did a Hot Pot Gaming episode. If you're listening to this on the podcast feed, you probably saw it. It is a Hot Pot Gaming episode I did with two guys, Section Skylight and Deployable Lover. And both of them are modern-day PSO players playing Phantasy Star Online in the modern day, and I wanted to understand why they do that. And so it's a whole podcast where we try to get down, I think, to kind of like what they like about Phantasy Star Online. And I want to try to one thing that kind of struggle with in that video or that podcast is the idea of like using nostalgia as an explanation for why you like something, because I do think there's a little bit more of a deeper thing there that you can dig into, and I think we did dig into it. I think the weird thing at the end of the podcast, I think I was listening for some particular framings on how they were communicating it, and I think I just kind of like missed it. So I think I got what I wanted out of it. I just think I was not necessarily hearing it how I thought I'd be hearing it. So ultimately, I think it did come to a good end. I have a weird moment at the end where I'm just like trying to figure out like how to get them to talk about it in a certain way, and they're just like, we're going to talk about it in their own way, and that worked fine. It got me. When I listened to it later, I was like, oh, I get what they were saying. So, that's kind of the nice thing about having months between these podcasts, or a month between these podcasts, is I get time to sit there and like listen to something and kind of ponder on it, and then also be able to kind of communicate that at the end. I'm really behind on the Hot Pot Gaming podcast. I have 3 recorded now, and I have not finished editing any of them. So I need to go ahead and edit 2 of them together sooner rather than later. That's why the Final Fantasy XI situation probably wasn't so great. But we will try to get there sooner rather than later, and make sure we can get that out on time. So the next podcast you guys should get, I believe, should be the PSO the next podcast, which is Ray Barnholt from Retronauts. So check that out when you can, assuming that I'm on top of it. Also, there's some other videos that came out. Well, actually, maybe just one video. The WarioWare Snapped review went up on the OCP Plus channel. One day I'll rename that channel to something more comprehensible. So that is up. I don't really have any thoughts on that. It is a WarioWare Snapped video. I guess it's like a little tech demo, and so it's kind of like reviewing a Dojin game, where it's like, what is there to really say about this? Not much, but let's talk about it anyways because I can. So I think that did not appear on the podcast, actually. Yeah, I think at the time I was originally planning on making that like a side podcast where I just specifically talked about games. But then I decided not to do that. So I repurposed that thing into just a review. But that's kind of how all this stuff ends up getting, processed towards the end, is gets repurposed for something, at least my game impressions kind of thing. Ideally, there's some things I've never compiled into a video, but that is kind of the purpose of a lot of those, is to eventually give it a space where if I wanted to edit it into a more coherent thought video, that is a possibility. So anyways. Thank you again, Conspicuous Snoop and Demodori, for donating. Let's talk about the news. We used to make like a news noise. I don't remember how it went, but like a long time ago, there was a news noise, and it's been many years since I've made it, I think I took it out because I just stole it from another show, basically. Although I don't think anyone has like the patent on making news-like noises before their news segments, so... We got some Switch localizations coming up. I have these news items out of order, though. Let me fix that real quick. But we have some Switch localizations coming up. 2 things I wasn't really expecting, although one of these series has a previous English entry before. Model Debut 3, Nicola. This is a fashion game. The series started around the same time, I believe, as Style Savvy on the Nintendo DS. And some of those games got localized and came over. I think some of them ended up on like DSiWare. I think there's some 3DS ones. I think some of them may have only hit Europe. I don't remember the entire story behind all this. But there's been games that have been localized before in this franchise. But it's been, I think, a while since the last one. Model Debut 3, Nicola, I believe, might be the first of the Switch ones to get officially localized. It's kind of they kind of shadow dropped it kind of thing. I was kind of nosing around a little bit on Twitter, and it seems like the impressions are not amazing about it, but I think the problem is that like Style Savvy as a game set very high bar, and like a lot of other people can't really reach that bar, even maybe to some extent Sin Sophia themselves with Fashion Dreamer. I don't know if it's like if Nintendo had a level of guidance they provided for that series, if there was a budgetary difference, or if like just it was, coincidence that those Style Savvy games in particular seem to perform or seem to be as critically praised as they were. But it is really it is interesting to see like this kind of like forever chase for style savvy. That being said, I will say, I was kind of musing about this with a friend a little bit, but like, at the end of the day, something like Love Nikki probably has way more impact and matters way more to the types of people that they're trying to sell to. But maybe, at the same time, Love Nikki is a mobile game franchise, right? So maybe that doesn't apply because the audience location where they're at is very different. So I don't know. I think something that, and I'm not saying this is true of everybody, so don't take this as me like, saying that everybody's dumb or something. I think there is probably something to be said about basically not looking at these games in the context of style savvy so much. That's fine. I think comparison points can be really good. I just think maybe the conversation I would like to have around these games probably would be disconnected from style savvy. If I were to cover these games, I think that would be my personal goal, is just to like not talk about style savvy that much in these reviews. Comparative reviews are fine and great for shorthand, and like, it was good to see other people kind of give their impressions of the game in that more comparative shorthand. That's like, again, there's places for that and stuff, especially on Twitter, a place with barely any space for you to text or put text in, right? For you to text. I feel like an old man saying that. But, anyways, in saying that, we have mostly talked about style savvy, but I guess at the same time, I don't really have a lot to say about Model Debut 3. It looks fine. It looks nice. These games are more about like being hired as a model and like showing up on like magazine covers and things like that. So I think the type of game is pretty different from like style savvy, but I think it is still like a financial based game where you're like posing on magazine covers for money and things like that. I could be wrong, but I believe that is the case. I have a few of them on 3DS. I kind of regret buying them because a lot of them are very similar and there are English versions of those games. So I think I'd rather just play the English ones rather than, suffer through stumbling through a bunch of Japanese text. And hey, look, I could buy Model Debut 3 if I really want to now. Momotaro Dentetsu. Sho Hesi Reiwa Mo Teiban. If you don't know, we've been talking about Konami for a while and like what Konami has been doing. And one of the things that have made Konami very successful in Japan is their Momotaro Dentetsu series. It has probably in some ways been one of the most impactful games on the Switch for them, at least. And even in Nintendo financial reports, Momotaro Densetsu is what is listed for the Japanese market when it comes to third party and things like that. So it's just a train game, board game kind of thing, and it's been around for a really long time, although I found out recently when talking to Vink that it had kind of gone away for a little bit. But I think there's like a Wii one, and then I think there's a lull between the Wii one and the Switch one that came out. Either way, I don't think any of these have ever gotten an English release before. Momotaro Dentetsu is, I believe, Sho Hesi Reiwa no Teiban, I believe is not the most recent game, but the game before it, because the most recent one's like a worldwide game where you like fly around in planes and stuff too. But they are doing an Asian release of this with English on it. So I believe it comes out in December kind of thing. So this is really interesting. I'm curious if they will at least throw it up on the Nintendo Switch eShop in America, or if they will not bother. I don't know like how appealing this game would be to a US audience. I feel like it probably wouldn't be worth it for Konami, but I don't know. I'd be really curious to see if they do it. But yeah, it's like December 12th is when it comes out, and it's Play Asia has a listing for it and stuff, so that's all there. I will maybe get it. Thinking about it. I feel like it's one of those games, kind of like Love and Berry, where I've talked about it so much that we should commit. The only problem is that I don't really have anyone to play party games with, so I would be pretty much playing it solo, or if there's like an online mode against randoms who probably will kick my butt because I won't know what I'm doing. So we'll see. I had a few people recently ask me about like, hey, well, I haven't played modern games recently, and I think a lot of it is the time balance and Final Fantasy XI. I think those are kind of the two big things right now. I could be wrong, but I think I have played less modern games in the last year than I think in most of years of my life. And I think a lot of that is because Final Fantasy XI absorbs much more time. So yeah. Speaking of buying games, I was supposed to talk about level 5 next. We'll skip that, and for now, we'll go back to level 5. If you don't remember, a few months ago, I started adding games to my Steam wish list with the general hope and dream that I will buy more Steam games at some point. A lot of games I'm kind of looking at haven't come out yet, I will say, so there's not a ton of things that I can like go and specifically purchase. With Tokyo Game Show recently, and I think also Tokyo Dungeon recently, there have been quite a few games that have showed up on Steam that I was kind of nosing around a little bit. I'm still finding them through sites like 4Gamer and Automata Media and things like that. But Nightmare Operator is a third-person shooter that is kind of that mix of shooting and melee that I really like. The challenge with any game with shooting and melee is making both of them have their own role, and both of them feel just as important. Games like Red Steel never really could figure that out. I think Dirge of Cerberus couldn't really figure it out either. I'm trying to think of like a game that did it very well. I'm trying to recall. I feel like there's at least one thing I played that was like really good. I mean, that doesn't mean those games are bad. It just means I think that the balance aspect can be really challenging with that. But anyways, so it's this kind of third-person shooter with like kind of I feel like a railgun kind of gun as like kind of the main weapon, and then you also have like a sword, and it has this kind of I'm trying to remember if it's like a PS1 kind of look to it or something, but it's like that kind of like cyberpunk. I don't know. It uses like Japanese horror tropes for like the enemies. I'm not a huge fan of that. Like, you know, the schoolgirl with like the like excessively big like eye sockets and mouth that are just like completely open black voids, and like what's that called? The ring looking girl kind of thing, and then just like general like I don't know, just like kind of like body horror kind of stuff that's like not really unique or interesting in my opinion. I have a hard time with games that have that aesthetic. I don't know why. I think they just kind of come off as like, oh, you're doing this kind of look. But I think I also don't have a lot of context for Japanese horror shows and things like that, right? So I don't know what they're referencing. I don't know what they're pulling from. A friend of mine said it looks kind of like Ghost in the Shell a little bit, which I don't really remember if Ghost in the Shell has any of those aspects in it. But I only ever really watched Standalone Complex, and I think the first movie as well, and it's been a very long time. Remember Togusa? I like Togusa because he's just a guy with a gun. My favorite type of character, basically. But yeah, it just looks mechanically pretty cool. Aesthetically, I think it looks okay. But aesthetic seems to be the big focus of it. But the mechanics are there, I think, to support it, and I think the actual gunplay and swordplay itself, I think, look pretty good. The problem you run into with trailers like this, though, is that, you know, the people who are making those trailers kind of want the game to look a particular way, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean when you sit down and play it, that will be the most effective way to play that game. Like I said earlier, a lot of games like this suffer from guns being too good or melee weapons being too good. And so trying to find the in-between to make both relevant and both usable in different situations is, I think, really challenging, but I think it can be really cool when successful. So the other game was All in Abyss, Judge the Fake. There's not a lot to say about this other than it is a gambling card game kind of thing. I don't even know what kind of gambling it is. It's like 5 cards on the table, so I'm not gonna be able to tell you it's speed or something like that. I have played more gambling games, so if I knew the rule set, I would probably actually be able to tell you what it is versus just like before I probably just been like, I don't know, it's cards. Well, it's one of those poker. I've heard poker before. I'm a little bit more knowledgeable on what those games are now that I've played a strip card game on the PCFX and the Final Fantasy XIII 2, Saz's Heads or Tails. There we go. On that journey, still haven't gotten very far since Saz or Heads or Tails. It's been a little bit. But yeah, it basically is like a gambling card game with like kind of an anime girl aesthetic, but it's more like horror kind of thing. Maybe a horror, darker tone kind of thing. There's another game that has been out and very popular recently that's like a gambling card game as well. I forget the name of it, but I've been seeing it kind of all over the place. And it is one of those situations where I feel a little bad because I feel like the difference between that game and this game is just there's a character on screen and it's like an anime aesthetic character, which is really weird because like I'm not a big anime fan. I often will like roll my eyes at like, especially like very sexy characters and stuff in anime, or like characters with like very particular designs that look like they're trying to appeal to very specific people. Let me pull this up. I don't remember if she looks like that. Oh, I don't have the link. I'm sorry. I do not have the link for this, so I'm just not going to open it right now. I'll put the link in the podcast show notes, but I'll have to go find it again. But yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where like, oh, anime girl face. I'll pay attention to this video game when I probably should just play whatever without there being an anime girl face on there. That's part of why we played Monster High Ghoul Spirit is because I was trying to get over that kind of more anime tropey kind of, I don't want to say hesitancy, but like I think sometimes anime games get, games with an anime aesthetic, maybe I should say in general, games that are Japanese as a whole sometimes just get like bonus points for being Japanese, and I don't like that. I don't like that I do that. It is something that I'm not a fan of personally. So anyways, level 5 had an event. This is pretty old news story stuff, so I won't spend too much time on it, but they showed off Deca Police, Inazuma 11 Reeve, which is a remake of the original Inazuma 11 game on the Nintendo Switch, which is interesting because the original was a DS game, and I think it pretty heavily used the touchscreen, so I'm curious how much of that will be maintained in the Switch version, because you can't really rely on people to have access to the touchscreen on the Switch. A new Professor Layton game, I kind of feel whatever about it. I think my problem with it is that, like, aesthetically it looks okay. I don't think Layton looks very good himself in that kind of, like, 3D environment without, like, very specific camera angles. And even though the game actually kind of is limited in some ways in how you view Layton, I don't think it does a very good job of making him look good from all those different angles. Admittedly, he's a man with a Lego head, so I don't know how you do that, but it just kind of looks awkward and out of place, visually at least. But I think for me, probably more than anything, is that, like, I think one of the things that Professor Layton does that I'm not the biggest fan of, and Rhythm Thief has this as well, where you have to, like, go and click around town and just go to different icons and, like, click on NPCs. So you have, like, it's kind of like one static view of an area, and then you kind of just, like, select people and, like, you can scroll it around. That's not to say this is all what the game has, but in the footage they showed, that seemed to be kind of what they're doing again, but with different graphics. I would like to see it be a situation where you have a little bit more free roaming ability to kind of, you know, walk around and things like that. I know for some people that's not as interesting because it wastes more time, but for me, I like being able to kind of, like, engage in that world a little bit more directly in a way. Fantasy Life was there as well, but I don't think I actually looked at anything that was with Fantasy Life. So the last thing was Holy Horror Mansion. This is a new IP, apparently supposed to be the successor to Yokai Watch. So it actually looks kind of interesting. It's kind of like a mix of, like, Yokai Watch and, like, Luigi's Mansion kind of look. Unfortunately, I think people were kind of upset about, like, Yokai Watch fans were kind of upset about the direction it was going because it wasn't kind of more formal Yokai Watch, which, you know, I kind of am. Either way, Yokai Watch has not been successful outside of their mobile game recently, right? So they got to try something new. I'm not gonna blame them for that. The existing fan base for Yokai Watch is not enough to support Yokai Watch to what it seems to be what they're trying to do. At least the Yokai Watch that they were creating before. Obviously, maybe a lower budget version of Yokai Watch, maybe. Holy Horror Mansion seems like them trying to do another approach to try to expand the audience. Whether or not you can get noticed in this market, I don't know. Holy Horror Mansion, I think Level 5 has a style that's, like, really recognizable and interesting, but also it's, like, fairly generic in some ways, I feel like. And so I don't know how you get noticed as a Level 5 game these days. I feel like back in the 2000s, it was a lot less common to see games that looked like Level 5 games. Now I feel like you see a lot of games that look like Level 5 games. So anyways, but one of the kind of big dramas that happened with this was, like, the use of AI art in the trailer. I will say the trailer, I don't think showed any real gameplay or anything from what I recall. So whether or not AI art's being used in the game itself is a different thing. There's actually a really good Automata Media article where, I forget where, but Level 5 basically talked about their use of AI for game development. And a lot of it comes down to kind of just, like, pre-prepping art for an artist to come back and actually, like, clean it up and like, go over it. A lot of those scenes in that trailer fly by so fast. The fact that they're AI, I don't think really matters from a aesthetic perspective because you just don't really see it very long. I think if you were to linger on those screens in a video game, it would be a lot more apparent and a lot more noticeable. So obviously there's a greater concern here beyond that when it comes down to, you know, the ethics of, like, okay, who was that art trained on? What kind of protections do they have? And then also, you know, what does that mean for putting, you know, artists out of work and stuff like that? There's a lot of questions about that. And that's probably the bigger thing, what people are flustered by. But, you know, I don't really have the answers to those things. So I'm not going to sit here and act like I know what is right or wrong in that regard. But what I will say is that when I looked at the trailer, like, it didn't, like, immediately jump out at me. The one thing I think was maybe most noticeable is like the city scene. For some reason, the roads were like weirdly shaped in a way that was odd. And I think it also had one of those things where like the text was kind of weird, and because AI can't do text very well. That being said, there are many video games with just like fake video game text, right? Like if I look at Phantasy Star Online text, let me tell you, I can't read any of that. And there is an alphabet behind it, so that, you know, people I think appreciate that versus like AI text not being able to figure it out. But how many people looked at that text and actually deciphered that it was something that somebody created versus just background noise for Phantasy Star Online is kind of another thing, I think. So, anyways, still very curious if level 5 is gonna hit with any of these games. Deca Police, their like police RPG thing with like furry characters and things like that, I think out of all these games seems the most appealing to me, and I would say probably the game with the most opportunity to succeed. I feel like maybe Professor Layton, but I feel like the rest of these games I'm not looking at and being like, level 5 is gonna really come back with this. But who knows? I don't know anything, right? Like I have questioned many video game releases before and have been completely wrong. So I'm not saying that as me saying that people are wrong for making these video games. So, you know what video games people are wrong for making? Dead or Alive Venus Vacation Prism, or I think it's called Venus Vacation Prism Dead or Alive. I think they did it like backwards or something like that. This is a new game in the Venus Vacation franchise. If you don't know, Venus Vacation is the live service game that is based off the volleyball spin-off of Dead or Alive. It's been going on for almost a decade now. I played it back in, I think, 2017 is I think when I played that game on DMM Games a little bit. And it was interesting, but it's very much like a feeding swimsuits kind of thing. They've been making new characters and stuff like that for Venus Vacation for a long time now, but I don't really know the current state of the game in terms of, you know, who's playing it, if it's anyone, like if it's a large enough set of people that is like meaningful, or if it's just like a set number of whales who are just willing to, you know, dump a bunch of money. That I don't really know. I actually don't know the current narrative around like funding mobile games and like how you get money coming in. Like, is it still the case where like whales are the majority of the income? I don't actually know, because when I think about live service games and things like that today, the audience is significantly broader than I think before, and I think it's a lot more acceptable. So like, how many people are doing small transactions in live service games? I actually don't really know. Although I feel like we maybe talked about it a little bit on an article a few months ago. Now I think about it, but I can't remember it. So what good did that do me? Anyways, so this new game, I don't really know if this is like a free-to-play game. It looks like it might be more of its own standalone thing. It is coming out on PS4, PS5, and PC across Steam and DMM, although don't get your hopes up about that, meaning that you can buy it on English language Steam, or American Steam, because I think the current Venus Vacation, while in English, is not available on Steam in the American region, United States. I don't know how broad Steam categorizes people. It is the Steam store specifically for me. The one American on Steam right now, it's me. Everything else is a facade. What's that the movie? The Truman Show? Steam is just there to, I don't know. I don't remember the Truman Show at all. I don't know the point of the Truman Show. I don't remember the story or the narrative or what the lesson was meant to be learned from the Truman. Jim Carrey? Jim Carrey. Is that his name? I don't even know if that's his name. The guy who played Dr. Robotnik. I think his name's Jim. I think his first name is Jim, at least. I don't know if I'm getting him mixed up with Kerry, the like presidential candidate in 2004. Whatever. What am I talking about? This is a romantic adventure game featuring, I think they said 6 of the Venus Vacation girls. I believe so far most of everybody mentioned is a Venus Vacation exclusive character. I think there's one character that did have a crossover in DOA 6. Based on what I understand, but I don't think they've provided a full list, but they do have, I believe the main girl from Venus Vacation, Fiona, She's like a girl with like a light pink or light purple hair. She's one of my favorite early characters in Venus Vacation. And then there's one other girl. Oh, the DOA 6 girl. I forget what her name is. Or she's, I think, originally from Venus Vacation, but they had a crossover where they brought her into DOA 6, I believe. So I believe there's still a few more characters to be announced. Out of all the DOA girls, Venus Vacation girls, I would want, I think her name is Shandy, the purple-haired girl, and then Patty. I like Patty. So there you go. If you're in the Venus Vacation lore, there's my 2 picks of who should be in Venus Vacation Prism. But yeah, as a romantic adventure game, visual novel style game, I'm going to guess it's going to be a lot more linear, a lot more narrative based. I don't really know enough about the DOA lore to say how much it can support that. I know games like the previous Venus or DOA Extreme Volleyball games and things like that had dating modes. I don't know how much of that was like narrative focused or character dialogue focused versus, more stat driven and things like that. So I'll be curious to see what it looks like in its final form. The price is set as to be determined, so it could be a free to play game. I don't know. And I don't know for sure, but it looks like it has like a new engine, but I don't know if they're using new assets. But I don't know if it's Unreal Engine, the most recent Unreal Engine. I don't know what Venus Vacation runs in. I think it's like DOA 5's engine, I think is what that thing's built off of. I could be wrong. But I don't think they've said if it's like just a new engine or what. But they've been talking about doing something new with DOA for a while. I think the way that people assumed it would be more in the fighting game sense. But, in this case, we have a romantic adventure game. So for the core current audience of Dead or Alive, of who's left right now, I think it makes sense. When it comes to like a DOA fighting game, there was recently a post by Harada, I think, the guy who does Tekken, mentioning the fact that I think they're the only 3D fighter left. Does that mean there's room for space in 3D fighting for competition? I am not the person to ask for about that, but I would be curious to see if somebody can come in and kind of dethrone it a little bit. I know there was like a Virtua Fighter thing that was being talked about for a while. I don't know if that's just the Virtua Fighter esports edition thing that came out, or if there was like a longer term thing that seemed to be coming up as a potential thing. But yeah, I would love to see a new DOA, but I never played DOA 6, so I'm not exactly somebody who is waiting for the next DOA, because I have DOA 6 to play if I really want to play DOA. It's in the game. Our last story, this is the Illusion thing, so the 18 plus adult company. So if you don't want to talk about this or hear this in your ears, feel free to, bail now. That being said, we're not going to talk about anything lewd as far as I'm aware, so I think you'll be good. So just a bit of history, and hopefully I'm remembering this right, because I did not go back and look at it. Illusion. This is a long time kind of a H-game developer who was pretty known for having high quality kind of visual 3D characters for their games. They had kind of 2 different approaches from what I saw, which is one being more like cel-shaded anime look. I think that game looked a lot less good than their more realistic kind of stuff. I think the more realistic stuff, I forget what is it? Honey Select, I think is what it was called. I don't know if that is the specific game that used that engine, or if it's just like multiple games that use that engine or whatever. But so they had been making H games for a while. One of them on Steam was like a survival game, and all of them include sex in some aspect, right? Anyways, so this company had been around for a really long time, making PC games for a very long time, and then all of a sudden they were like, "Hey, we are dissolving basically," and they're going to shut down their storefront because they were selling their games directly online, even physical games. And then they're like, and we're not going to make any more video games. All our stuff's going to be delisted from Steam, all that stuff. Then another company called Illumination showed up and was like, "Hey, we're going to have the sequel to one of their last games, VR Kanojo, VR Girl, I guess what that would be. I don't know. Which is basically a kind of a parody game of the Bandai Namco Summer Lesson. But instead of, just, being in a room with a girl, helping them study, you be in a room with a girl and you do whatever you do. Anyways, point being, there's a little weird drama where, like, I believe it was the original Illusion Twitter account was like, "This is not our successor company." like specifically saying these people, they don't represent where we're going. We are shutting down. Thank you for your time. And then I believe there was a follow-up from Illumination that was like, no, we are. I don't know if anybody ever looked into this to figure out like what happened here. I think one thing we speculated at the time was like maybe there's a tax reason for them to kind of be a complete cut. But either way, Illumination, has now officially launched their first kind of marketing campaign for their first game. Again, a VR Kanojo game. I don't know if it's a remake of the first one or if it's a sequel. Either way, seems to be an improved iteration of that original game at the very least. On that page, they did a Kickstarter, which is interesting because the game's going to launch in the end of this year. So the Kickstarter, I don't really think is like, I would be curious. I didn't go and look at the Kickstarter stuff. It looked like it was mostly like outfits and things like that, but I'm curious like how much of the Kickstarter needed to happen for the game to actually come out. If it's that close in the development. Like I remember the Wonderful 101, when that got like kickstarted, the remake was like basically done. They just basically were doing a Kickstarter campaign because they could, kind of thing. I don't really remember the logic behind it. Maybe there's a reason, but anyways, they did it. They reached 1,000% of their Kickstarter goal or whatever crowdfunding thing they use platform. But in that original post where they're talking about themselves, they actually did list the staff. And this was what I was most interested in, to know a little bit about, who is behind this company, given the weird kind of, situation that happened. And as far as I can tell, on the main staff list, there's probably more people that work on it and stuff like that, but on the main staff list, there's a guy, I think it was like Jens is what his name was. I didn't write it down here. Jens, yes. He seems to be kind of the sole person that's coming back from Illusion on this list, at least. As far as I'm aware, this is a very skim top level thing, so don't take this as me being like 100% fact, fully researched. But he seems to be the only person that's coming forward from Illusion, and he basically did character models and things like that. And so he was creating, doing kind of the thing that probably matters most in a porn game in terms of making the visuals look good. Maybe not matters most. I'm going to take that back. But Illusion's gimmick was a lot of making good-looking porn games, right? That was kind of their thing. 3D model porn games. Anyways, so point being is that this seems to be kind of the main guy from Illusion that came over. He is listed as a supervisor, so hard to say how directly involved he is, but that is kind of, seems like the person who came out of this that came forward from the past company. Now, there's a few other people involved here, but as far as I can tell, these people have not been or at least they're not advertised as being directly involved with Illusion in the past. One is Takanami Rei, which is the scenario writer, which actually I've talked about this recently on a PCFX Fan Club podcast, where Angel Blade came up when Matt was talking about it. Apparently it's like a tabletop kind of game, kind of like Dungeons and Dragons, but each book is like an individual girl and things like that. And I don't know enough about like how Angel Blade works as a tabletop game, if there's erotic elements to it. I know the anime itself had some erotic elements to it, or at least erotic themes and things like that. Not a show you'd want to like show a kid probably. But anyways, the writer for Angel Blade, which apparently originally had something called Angel Quest as well, but I couldn't find anything immediately about that. That's not to say it isn't out there. I just didn't put the effort into finding it. But it seems like she is the current writer on the project. I don't really know how much story is involved in these games, so I don't know. I'm curious if VR Kanojo has a story. Erotic games can definitely have stories. That is not what I'm questioning here. I'm just trying to think of like, have I seen anything from Illusion that looks like it has story in it? And I don't know. Are you an Illusion fan? Tell me about the Illusion narrative. Tell me about the Illusion lore. How are all the Illusion games connected? The other person is actually somebody who's just kind of in the game dev aspect, and like I don't want to undermine him, but like his entire section's about like what like languages he knows, so like programming languages. So there's not a lot for me to say there. But the CEO of this company, I believe, also was not specifically directly involved in Illusion. But apparently had worked on games like Shadow Hearts and things like that. And also, kind of interestingly, he did the character models, or how does he do character models? It actually doesn't say what he did, but he apparently worked on that Final Fantasy VIII tech demo. If you ever saw that PS2 tech demo, that was kind of showing off what the PS2 was capable of doing, and they basically, similar to the Final Fantasy VII PS3 tech demo, rendered Squall and Renoa in like a PS2 visuals, doing the ballroom scene kind of thing. But after I'd say probably after the PS2 era, from what I can tell. It looks like he went off and started making his own stuff, one being something called 3D Custom Girl, which, as far as I can tell, is just like a really old erotic game with like heavily customizable characters. Again, something Illusion was known for doing. Nothing specifically about him is listed for Illusion, so... but yeah, so it's kind of interesting that most of these people don't seem to be Illusion, but one person is. Again, these are the very top level people listed on their Kickstarter, so... we don't really know what happened still, or I don't really know. I don't. And I'm guessing most people listening to this don't know either. But that does not mean the world doesn't know. Somebody may have done this work and I have lost track. Maybe Mr. Jens is out there doing, interviews, talking crap about people. I'm guessing not. But yeah, I thought it was just kind of an interesting thing. Like, I wasn't really intending to talk about this again, but the fact that they listed their staff made me go, oh, I can actually like look in to see who was involved and who came forward and who did it. So, but at least one guy came from Illusion. So, at least one person is informing the decisions that Illumination's making with VR Kanojo. Anyways. That's it, though. Ooh, I feel parched. I don't know. I think I didn't drink enough water today, so I think I need to go back and hydrate. Coughed a few times in this episode. I'm gonna guess I'm probably not gonna catch them on the editing process, so you might hear those. I'm sorry, but that is how the cookie crumbles, I guess. I don't know. Localizations.com is the website. Check it out. There is one more video coming up on the OCP Plus channel before that content dries up. I believe it is a Dojin video? Let's find out. Let's learn together. I did not go and check this stuff out to see. But yeah, really getting these Hot Pot Gaming episodes are done is kind of the number one thing. If I do delay things, I'll try to let you guys know, but there's not a lot of avenues beyond just like, commenting on the YouTube channel. So if you're subscribed to YouTube, you might see an update on that. But I see, yes, a Dojin game on the 23rd. So there'll be a video on the 23rd going up. It is a game called Invasion of Earth, which is if you remember, like, Avenging Spirit on the Game Boy, it kind of reminds me of that. So, and that is the last of the scheduled OCP Plus content for now. I have stuff that I am working on, but it's just not done yet. But the OCP Plus channel is supposed to be a channel for fun, so I'm not going to worry about a schedule on there, other than the podcast stuff. So, but if I need to delay the podcast with Ray in it, I'll let you know. So, yeah. Anyways, thank you again for coming. Thank you again for donating on Ko-fi. For those who had donated, Demodori and Conspicuous Snoop, thank you again. Yeah, I'll try to get working on that Nintendo video sooner rather than later. So with a whole day worth of work available to be done on it, it should be should make good progress, I think, when that time comes. But we'll see. I don't really know what that video looks like visually, so that's a challenge in its own right. So like in my head, there are lots of sections of that video where I can't imagine what's on screen, which can be liberating in the sense of I can put anything I want and not have to care about it, or can be daunting in that if I want something to be represented on screen, I have no idea what to put in there. So anyways, thank you so much. I hope you guys have a great couple weeks, and I will talk to you later. Bye.